He spent 9 years in the Marine Corps, 7 years in construction, and then built a career on vulnerability. Hi, everyone. I'm Raymond Lee, the host of Clocking Out. Today's guest is Christopher Veal. This episode is about connection, being real, being open, and being curious. It's about leaving the old script behind and writing your own. Today, Christopher shares he didn't hate his job. He just knew he couldn't stay any longer. And being good at something doesn't necessarily mean it's your calling. Christopher thrived in construction project management after spending 9 years in the Marines, but he admits construction just wasn't feeding his heart. In the Marine Corps, he learned that improvise, adapt, and overcome, it's not just military speak, it's a mindset. It's knowing your mission helps you adjust as circumstances change. I personally connected with Christopher on so many levels, so without further ado, please enjoy Christopher Veal and his Clocking Out story. Christopher, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Glad to be here, Raymond. Looking forward to the conversation.
I am as well. And in preparation for our call here today, I had a chance to really be present with your TEDx talk. And I will tell you, it was packed with so much goodness. I wanted to share a couple of things. One, in terms of how it struck me. And then the second is a sort of mutual connection we have, which, the focus was around connection. And, what really spoke to me after listening, there were some things that you said around being real, being open, being curious. But, for me and my journey, I realize how important it is to just have a connection with yourself. In order for you to really feel connected to the world, the universe, to your family, you have to be connected to yourself. And in order to do that, it does allow you to be connected to others. And so the first thing is I just love the theme of connection. And I feel like a lot of the story in our conversation today about your journey is going to relate to that. So I'm really excited to bring that to our listeners. But the second thing is, and it is, it just warms my heart that we both had moms who we were incredibly close to, but we both had moms that we lost to lung cancer.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's me in the feels.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's heavy. I know it's heavy, but the thing that I will tell you is on your TEDx talk, you talked about how you connected with your 5-year-old daughter. And my daughter was 10, my son was 2 when it happened. This is over 12 years ago now. She was 60. It was a quick thing. And when you just shared that, I was just already like really listening. But then when you shared that, it just, and hearing the story about how you connected with your daughter as a result of that, it really connected with me. And I appreciate you sharing that and being vulnerable to share that because it's hard to lose a mom.
Yeah. Yeah, let me just get myself together here. I'm appreciating that there's something in the message that spoke to you, and I really do believe that connection and vulnerability are key to all that we do. And so I'm grateful that it spoke to you, and as connected as I was feeling to you before, I'm even more connected now, and like I'm ready to just let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely, Christopher. And my apologies for hitting this with you, but I feel like, when you're sharing journeys of an individual's life, it really is a culmination of events that occur, that are building blocks.
Well, you know what I want to say to that, Raymond? No apology for it. Because what it was is there was something that you saw there was a similarity we had. And yes, while it got me in my feels, I'm not bothered by that, right? Christopher 10, 15 years ago probably would have, but I embrace that's part of who I am. So I just want you to know no apologies are needed. I welcome that you were willing to share that with me too, because there was some vulnerability from you in doing that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. So, Christopher, let's start from the beginning. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Okay, I will give you the Reader's Digest condensed version because all the details are not that interesting. But I was born in Houston, Texas. Only lived there for a few years. My parents moved to St. Paul, Minnesota when I was 3. So my first birthday there was 4. I spent a few years there growing up. And then my parents divorced when I was 4. And my mom and I moved back to Canada, where she was from and her family was, when I was 8. So most of my growing up, my school years, middle school, elementary school, and high school were in Canada, in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And so that's really where a lot of those foundational years were for me. It was a great experience because we lived in the city, but my grandfather still had his farm. My aunt and uncle had a farm. And so my summers I would spend out there with my cousins. And so I got to experience living in the city and also being out in a rural setting. And it shaped who I was as a person too.
What was your most memorable moment about living in Canada as a kid?
Wow, there's lots of good ones. I think one of the things I remember is just, one that hits me is we lived about 90 minutes from, my mom and I lived about 90 minutes from where my aunt and uncle and my grandparents lived. And so most weekends we'd go out there. And one of the things I remember so fondly is Sunday nights, my mom and I would be driving back. It would usually be kind of late because we try and get the most of the time that we could with family. And driving in the car, and we used to listen to the radio. And they'd have like the radio plays, like Only the Shadow Knows and that radio theater and stuff. And just singing songs and laughing and telling stories. And it was those times just, at the time, it probably felt like we were filling time, but it was so rich that we got to connect. And now that I even put that together, I didn't realize that's what we were doing. But those are some of the things I love. And obviously the times on the holidays, spending it with family, getting to connect, and just create all those memories. That's really what shaped who I was.
Wow. So when you were younger, what did you dream of being?
It depends on what age you ask me. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a truck driver. And that was because as we were moving up to Winnipeg, I got to ride in the moving truck. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I got a little bit older and realized I didn't want to be a long distance truck driver. At one point, I probably wanted to be a police officer. I'm sure I dreamed of being an astronaut at one point. I do know that when I was in high school and looking at going into college initially, I was interested in law, and I was interested in becoming a lawyer, and particularly corporate or criminal law. And so that's kind of what I was aiming towards as I was finishing my high school career.
That's interesting. Yeah. I have to digress for a second because
Sure.
I remember in your TEDx talk, you talked about being in the Marine Corps and working in construction, which are like, real male dominated fields, and how, being vulnerable and sharing feelings and emotions are not something that just comes second nature.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to hear you say that as a kid growing up, those fields are truck driver, police officer, real masculine kinds of fields. That just struck me.
Yeah. Well, and I will say too, at one point I probably wanted to be an archaeologist and study dinosaurs. It kind of depended on the flavor of whatever I was interested in as a kid. Yeah. So again, depending on when you asked me, that answer could have changed too.
Yeah. So you were a dreamer. I love that.
I think I was, and I think I still am.
Mm-hmm. So what did you ultimately decide to do?
I originally went to school. After I graduated high school, I knew I was going to go to college. So I enrolled, but I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I thought I wanted to go into law, but I wasn't, my heart wasn't fully in it. So I took a semester and I said, I'm not ready to do this. And so dropped out of school and I worked for a year, which became, I think, almost 2 years. And then I realized, I'm ready to go back to college. This working a job for minimum wage isn't for me. So when I went back, I had become interested in aviation and I wanted to be a pilot. I'd always had a love for flying. And so I went to the University of North Dakota because they had an amazing aviation program that not only I'd come out as learning to fly, but get a degree as well. And then I got to UND my first semester and realized, wow, I'm going to come out of school $50,000, $60,000 in debt minimum and be one of about several hundred pilots that graduate each year. And I'm like, is this really what I want to do? I still love aviation. But what had happened along the way, and this is where the universe, I think, sometimes steps in, I had been looking at an Army ROTC scholarship to fly helicopters because I really love helicopters. And my roommate, my first year of college, I was a non-traditional student. I think I was 21 when I went back to college. But my roommate one day said, hey, I've got to stop by and talk to the Marine recruiter because he was looking at going in as a Marine officer. So I said, okay, no problem. Well, the rest is history, obviously, because you know what happened. But there was something that recruiter said, and I was just like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I think part of it was I thought, all right, if I'm going to climb a mountain, I'm going to climb the highest mountain. And that's no disrespect to any of the other services, but let's be real. Marine Corps dress blues do look pretty amazing as well. And I think when I look back now, I realize part of what it was that had the influence on me, because that recruiter said, and I didn't know for sure I was going to be an infantry officer, but he said, when you think about the average lieutenant in the Marine Corps, they all go through the same schooling to start. They all go through the basic school because every Marine officer is taught to be an infantry officer first, or a rifleman first. And what he said is, you may be responsible as a second lieutenant for 30 or 40 young men, some of them that it's their first time away from home. And so you're really a father figure to them. And I didn't know then, but that was the thing that really hooked me. The fact that I could potentially have an influence on these young men. And so that's what I decided. I also was looking at going in on an aviation contract. So I thought, why am I going to pay to learn how to fly when the Marine Corps would? And so that was it. And I decided I was going to go into the Marine Corps. So I finished my degree and I pursued my degree in criminal justice. Because as a backup, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll look at, federal agencies or things like that. And obviously the Marine Corps is what kept me, and the rest is kind of history.
Wow. It's very practical, in terms of how you connected the cost of college tuition to, how you're able to leverage that. For context, how many years were you in the Marine Corps?
I was on active duty for 9 years.
Where did you have to move to when you joined the military? And was there traveling?
The short answer is I think I did the math once, and I had to pack up and move 17 times in those 9 years. So there was a bit of moving around. My first duty station was in North Carolina. Technically, my first duty station was in Virginia at Quantico. But I was in North Carolina. I did a tour in Okinawa. I was in Milwaukee on recruiting duty. Did a tour in Iraq. My last duty station was at Camp Pendleton here in Southern California. So I bounced around a fair bit. And it was a great experience because it taught me a lot. Being able to be in different cultures around the world, you see how people live differently too. And it helped me get a bigger perspective on people's life experiences as well.
So if you had to offer advice to someone who could be listening that is a college student or thinking about college, and this is an option, what would you say was the outcome that you didn't imagine would have happened, that happened?
I think what I'd offer is don't be so honed in on the thing that it has to look like. And let me put a caveat on that. If you know exactly what you want to do, awesome. Chase it and go after it. I fell into the trap early on thinking I had to have it all figured out and knew exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. And if I had done that, I wouldn't be doing the work I am now, because back then I couldn't even see that this was work that would appeal to me. So this is a long answer in saying, be open. It sounds a little woo-woo, but the universe is going to give you signs. It's going to point you. Sometimes it'll be obvious, sometimes more subtle. And give yourself permission to explore. I think, and the advice I give my daughter right now, because she's a junior in high school, I tell her, if you think you know what you want to do, great, but also be open to trying different things, because you may find that there's something else that interests you more, and that might be the trail you're supposed to follow. So that's what I'd offer to someone. And here's the other thing I'd say is college isn't for everybody. I know that's kind of the culture here in the U.S. of the expectation is you finish high school and you go to college. For some people, that's not the thing. I'm a big advocate of, there are people that go to trade schools that do incredibly well, right? Or some people just aren't cut out for college. It's not their thing. That's not how they learn. So also don't feel the pressure that you have to do that because that's what everyone says you should do.
Well, that's such great advice. I feel like there is this pressure where, whether it's societal pressure, where it's pressure on your family, or even your siblings who go off to college, who could be older than you, and you sort of feel like, okay, I have to do equal or more than what they did. And it's good to hear that for you, the Marine Corps, was a place where you grew, you learned. In thinking back, was there any life lessons the 9 years that you spent there?
You're right. I think here's what I'd say. One of the biggest lessons that stayed with me throughout the years, in the Marine Corps, we have this saying, you say, improvise, adapt, and overcome. And what that really means is at its core is, I learned a couple things. One, planning is important, right? I mean, when you're looking at assaulting an objective, you have to kind of have some parameters of what you're going to do. But the thing is, as soon as you start that mission, the bad guys don't have the plan. They're not going to respond exactly as you think they will. And so there's an importance in helping people understand what's that objective. In the Marine Corps, we call it, or in the military, we call it commander's intent. Like at the end of the day, at the end of this mission, here's what I want, the end state I'm looking for. And I'll translate that to the real world for people. If leaders are clear on saying, here's the vision we're working towards, what that does is it gives people an opportunity then, as things change, as the environment shifts, they can make decisions at their level to keep working towards it, as opposed to having to go back to that leader all the time to get the answer and say, what do I do now? And so it's one of the ways that the Marine Corps in particular taught me about pushing that decision-making down to the lowest possible level to give them the autonomy to accomplish what they need to. So improvise, adapt, and overcome is about knowing what you have to get to, and then when things change, how do you adjust? How do you shift based on the current conditions that are different than what you'd planned so that you can still move forward and support the other units that are doing the things they're doing?
No, and I love the one that you chose. To me, was the one that had the most impact on you, and it's sort of foundational. I feel like whether it's college or 9 years in the Marine Corps or 4 years in the military, there's a foundational element to just going through the institution of that I think is really the life lesson. And, this foundation really set you up for success. And I appreciate you sharing that. So tell me about your first big job.
Right. So when I left the Marine Corps, I ended up going into construction. And it was a job that I often say it fit my skills, but it didn't feed my soul. And I enjoyed the work. I'm a big lifelong learner. And so one of the reasons when they first recruited me, I was like, I don't know anything about project management or construction. But they said they were willing to teach me. And so I got to learn it. The cool thing is it was a structural steel company. I got to work with tower cranes. I'd never even thought of them before, but I was helping put them up. I wasn't literally doing it. We had paid professionals. But I got to run some of those projects. And so I got to try different things, which is a theme throughout my life. I've realized that I'm often open to discovering new things as opposed to just saying I've got to do the same thing over and over again. And I did the work and I enjoyed it. I liked the work that I did, but it didn't fulfill me. And I finally got to the point where I realized I can't keep doing this. I'm not proud to admit that was the only time in my professional career that I've been actively disengaged in a job. And that was when I knew it's time to go, because I'm not being honest to this organization and I'm not being honest to myself. So I went back to school and got my master's in organizational leadership. That's when I found my way to learning and development and OD work. And that was when I was like, oh, this is the work I'm supposed to be doing.
It's so interesting. Like, I'm just connecting the pieces here. So when you had that meeting with that recruiter with the Marine Corps, and the one thing that he said was, joining the Marine Corps is going to provide you with the opportunity to develop people. And it was interesting. That was the thing that he said in that meeting that got you to enlist. And now playing it forward, you went through this first job, doing a job, and it wasn't feeding your heart. And how long did you work in construction before you realized?
You know what? I don't know exactly how long it was. I was in that job for almost 6 years. It was longer than I should have been there. And what I also know is if I had left it sooner, I might not have gone back to school like I did and done other things. So you asked earlier about regrets, and I don't have regrets. There are decisions I look back on and think I might have done it differently. But if someone said, would you go back and do it differently? I wouldn't. Even some of the ones that caused hurt or pain for me, because I realized those experiences shaped who I am today. Right? If I had changed one little thing I did back then, I might not have met my wife and have my daughter. Right? So there's so many other things that would have changed. So, again, I don't regret anything. And I always look at, am I giving my best effort and showing up as who I want to be? And if I'm doing that, then I'll be okay.
I appreciate you sharing that. When you were working in construction and you decided to go back to college, was there, within the 6 years, was there a period toward the end that you said, I'm going to go back to college and pursue this degree while I'm working? And was it a gradual break, or did you left construction altogether to completely make a pivot?
Yeah, I completely left. I knew that I needed to get out of that role because, as I said, when I got to the point where I was actively disengaged, to me, it just wasn't in integrity with who I wanted to be. So I left that, found another job, got my foot in the door in an HR role. And that was when I'd started going back to school, and then ended up, that one didn't last for very long. And then I pivoted and found another opportunity, but that's while I was still going back to school, and wound up at my first real learning and development job. And that was when like I said, I felt like I was home.
Wow. How old were you at that point? Around?
That was 2012-ish. So I was like 30. No, hold on. Do the math, Christopher. I was older than that. I can't do math right now. I was in my late 30s. Yes.
Late 30s.
Yes.
So I'm curious, I'm going back to your TEDx talk where you really emphasize connection. And I'm wondering, when was the point in your journey, and had it occurred yet, where you really were connected with yourself in terms of recognizing like your true identity and who you were called to be? And I just wonder, was that when you left construction and you got your master's degree, or did that happen later?
I think, so I talk about it in the talk as well. I think the seeds were planted while I was still doing that construction job, because one of the stories I talk about is when my daughter was born, and a lot of the guys that I worked with were giving me a hard time, right? What are you doing taking maternity leave, and raising kids is women's work, and all that old BS that is outdated. And I think that's when I really started to realize, okay, this isn't who I want to be. This isn't me. But I don't think I really stepped into taking the time to understand who I was. I knew it at a surface level. I think where things really shifted for me was around 2015. I did a year-long leadership program, the Coactive Leadership Program. And in part of that, I had to take some hard looks at who I was and how I was showing up and the patterns that I was creating. And coming out of that program is when I really decided I want to learn more about what vulnerability means, what masculinity means, and how they relate. And around 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, I'd also happened across Brene Brown's work. And so I will also admit that Brene was a big part of me unpacking what vulnerability meant and starting to look at how I had been, I'll say, resisting it a lot in my life up to that point.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I should say spending 9 years in the Marine Corps and then working in construction for 6 years certainly gave you the experience to recognize when it didn't show up. And not just for you personally, but also for people around you. And my sense is that people that you were working with struggled with it and really didn't understand how to show up. And I think subconsciously you probably saw that as an opportunity. Now that you're like sort of playing it forward, hearing Brene Brown talk about vulnerability, going through the leadership program, and then understanding all the components that make up vulnerability, you were able to connect dots back to the work that you were doing at the construction, 9 years in the Marine Corps. Like all of those things it just became so much clearer, I would imagine.
Right. Well, I appreciate you saying that, Raymond, because I think at the time I didn't know because I was in it. And so here's the other thing I'll say. Some of the Marines I served with, like, I saw a great love for one another, right? Like, these are people you are willing to put your life on the line for, and they're willing to do the same. There is no deeper bond you can have. Will those guys say to each other, I love you? Probably not. Now, let me be clear. I've been out of the Marine Corps for 20 years plus, so maybe they would now. But what I realize is they have a tight bond. Like anybody who's served in the military and especially served in combat, like there is a closeness you have that supersedes vulnerability. You may not say it, but it's there. But as I look back, I think at the time I didn't know there was a lack of vulnerability. When I was in construction, I didn't know because I was in it. It's right. It's like telling a fish, describe what water is. They don't know. But as I look back, I realize, oh, okay, now I can see this thing that maybe I've been wanting where it wasn't, or where there were moments that there were. And I don't fault any of that. You know, there are a lot of great things I took from my time in the Marine Corps. Like, it created the foundation for how I view leadership. And I took a lot from my experience in construction. I also know, like, that's not for me, but it helped set me up to do the work that I'm doing now. So for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine too, when you were working in construction, you had this feeling of an unsettled feeling of
Yes.
sort of like, this is how I'm feeling in the moment. And at the time, you could describe it maybe, you could feel it, but you don't necessarily know how to label it. And then now playing it forward again, you know, it's sort of like, yes, that's what that was. And not only does it help you sort of evolve as a thought leader in the work that you're doing today, but it also allows you to recognize that exist and there is a pathway to helping someone through it, which I think is pretty cool.
There is, well, when you talk about that, and again, it's been a number of years since I've been in construction, but there is a lot of that, what I call hyper-masculine culture, right? And there is something about, you know, like, it's the only thing is like, you got to do this chest thumping. I remember another one of my colleagues, he and his wife were pregnant not long, a couple years after my daughter was born. And he kind of fell into that, you know, she's going to be home taking it. And like, because that's what some of the guys were talking about, right? And admittedly, the guys that were leading the organization, some of them were a generation ahead of me. And so one of the things that I've learned in this process too is I don't fault the people that came before me, because those guys that were 10, 20, 30 years older than me, they were operating off of the beliefs that they had been given, right? And so when I think about a generation before me, two generations before me, they had a different approach to how we were expected to be as men. I don't excuse their behaviors, but I also don't blame them, because again, we're a product of our environment and the people that bring us up. And so for me, it's not about I'm going to make them wrong for it, but I'm not going to give them credit for it either. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
It makes total sense. Yeah, I love it. And I also like the fact that you really took action. You know, 6 years is not a long time. I speak with people who will spend decades in a career where it's just sort of, it builds and builds, and they have kids and they have family and they have insurance and all the things that come with the stability of a career. And to unravel that, to start something new, it's really hard. So
it can be, yeah. And it was not an easy decision to make either, you know. And I just knew that I had to, because I wasn't happy and it was starting to impact other areas of my life.
Yeah. Can you share? Would you mind sharing how it impacted?
Well, I think, you know, some of the biggest things is I wasn't happy the way I used to be. You know, I would, Sunday nights, I'd be laying in bed going, all right, I got to go to work, like, and not necessarily excited about it. And not every job you do, you have to love and get excited every day. But when the days where I wasn't looking forward to it were more than the days where I was, I knew for me, like, that wasn't right. And the other thing too is I was commuting, you know, an hour plus to get to work in the morning. And that's not including when I had to go to job sites up in LA or further. And so my daughter was fairly young at that time. And so that meant less time that I could be home with her. And ultimately I realized my time with her is going to be more important than spending an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours commuting to a job site and back. And so that was also a factor for me of I wanted to have more time at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's that you start to feel the build up, and as your kids get older, your daughter gets older, you start to really recognize what you're missing. And so you graduate with your master's, you go through this leadership program. What was next?
So that's when in 2012 is when I first really stepped into a learning and development role. And that was a great opportunity. So a lot of what I did was facilitating training and designing training. And I love that work. It was a great foundation for me. And that's where I really found I could bring my talents. You know, I'm good at building rapport and building connection. And so I love that I got to do that work. And it exposed me to different aspects of learning and development that I didn't know about otherwise. And that opportunity led me to another one where I got to step up and then take a leadership role in an organizational development piece and create kind of an organizational development program and a leadership program and things like that, and help guide the organization. And through it all, so when I did my master's, two of my professors introduced themselves as coaches. And when I said, coaching, what's that? Because I had only known coaching in athletics. When they explained what it was, I'm like, wait a minute, I think I've been doing coaching my whole life. That could be part of my work. And that was it. The light bulb went off and I was like, oh, the angel sang. And so I went and got my training in 2013 and got my credential. And it's been a part of the work that I do. So I was fortunate that in the organizations I was working in for the next several years, I got to do coaching. I kept my coaching business on the side because I always knew one day I'd eventually go off and do my own thing. But it was great because even when I'm not coaching someone, I'm using those coaching skills, or I'm more coach-like in the way that I listen and I communicate. And that has been really powerful, especially as I'm talking with leaders at all levels. And so that really helped me start to build upon my foundation of organizational development work. And it was, like I said, I was like a kid in a candy store.
Wow. So you worked in sort of the corporate environment. You worked for a big company. You did training, leadership development. You went, got your coach certification. You were coaching. How long did it last before you decided that you were going to leave corporate altogether?
Well, I started in, I'll say in corporate, if I don't count the construction gig, for about 7 years. And in December of 2019, I was like, okay, I had just left an organization and I realized this is the universe telling me something. I've been talking about going all in on doing my business. And so I said, all right, I'm going to do it. And the universe was apparently listening because it said, all right, Christopher, then just to make sure you're serious, we're going to bring on a pandemic so there's no jobs to tempt you. And I said, thank you, universe. I didn't say that at the time, but it ended up being a great opportunity because as the pandemic hit and the world shut down, so many leaders were now trying to figure out, okay, I don't have my people here within arm's reach. How do I lead them? And so my business really grew then because I got to help leaders figure out how do they navigate that space? How do they still be a leader even though they don't physically have their not literally their hands on people, but they don't have them in the same spaces with them. And so it was a blessing in disguise.
Was there something about the 7 or 8 years working in, I'll call it the corporate world as a training, development, leadership development, coaching expert? Was there something that pulled you away from that? Like, was there, were you getting to the point again where you just weren't being fulfilled?
I think, so there are things that I love and that I miss about working in an organization. One of the things that I really miss, and I missed it from my time in the Marine Corps, is having that team of people that you're working with, right? There's something about it. Don't get me wrong. I love being an entrepreneur, and I miss having a team that you can lean into. Sometimes it's just to say, hey, how are you doing? So in that sense, that is something that I kind of like, But for me, it wasn't so much that I was tired of it. Every organization, everything's got its red tape and its bureaucracy. No system is ever perfect. And you learn to navigate it. Ultimately, there were some roles where I was like, there was a lot of work that I loved of it. And there were some elements that I'm like, not as crazy about it, but I also knew that's part of the job, right? Just like my time in the Marine Corps. There's things I loved about some of what I did. And other times I'm like, this sucks. But you learn to adapt. And so just like with being an entrepreneur, there's things I love, but there's also parts of it where I have to really work hard because, again, I don't have that consistent paycheck coming in. I got to do the work to make it happen. And one of the things that I do also is making sure I'm building time to connect with other folks, because it can be lonely work being an entrepreneur sometimes. Even though my work is with other people, it can be lonely work sometimes.
Yeah, there's two things that you said there that are interesting. One is, first of all, the community. I think that if you're listening and you're in a place where you are looking to make a leap of faith and you enjoy the community, I think trying to build that outside of your work, whether you're volunteering, you're a part of associations, you sort of create your community outside of work,
right,
that allows you to plug in and fill that, because you're right, it is, when you don't have that outlet or that connection, I think it does feel very isolated. The other thing that you said that I think is interesting, it's a perspective about working in a corporate job where when you started, you got your master's, you started in this role, it was totally new. And I think as you're growing and you're getting experience over the course of, let's say, 7 years, your abilities, your experience grew, but there was also an expiration date on that because companies, really well-run companies, do a great job at changing your job every 2 years. They do these rotational assignments so that you don't get stagnant. But in your particular case, if you're with a company and you're adding value, there is a point where it's like, okay, what's next? And then oftentimes people just go to the next company to find something that's more challenging. But even then there's an expiration date. And it also, you're subject to, am I going to like my boss? Am I going to like the culture? Like there's all of these things. And so I feel like there's, in that December of 2019, you had a question. You had to ask yourself, am I going to go pursue another company who's going to feed my soul with work where I can continue to grow, or am I going to take the leap of faith? And it sounds like you listened to the universe and said, it's time. There's a lot of uncertainty, but you made a choice. And obviously, you made the right choice.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's, and I won't get the quote just right, but the essence of it is there's something about when you fully commit, then the universe aligns behind you, right? And it'll start to work in your favor. And so when I made that decision and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I was truly bought into it, opportunities started happening for me. But because up until that point, I'd kind of had one foot in working for an organization and one foot in having my business, I wasn't all in on either one. And so that kept me hesitant. And it's no guarantee that you're gonna survive and work, but I don't regret the decision. It's taught me so much about myself. I've gotten to work with some amazing individuals in industries I never would have otherwise. And so, it's also taught me a lot of who I am and how I want to show up in the world.
Yeah, I love that. So did you have an idea of the business, the name, when you started in January of 2020?
The short answer is yes, and it's changed. So when I first made my business back in 2013, when I started my coaching, it was one, and it was Dare Consulting is what it was, which confused people because they're like, you do consulting? I'm like, no, I do coaching. But I like the tagline of Dare to be something different. That obviously didn't last. And then I rebranded to Datitude Coach because to me, a part of the way I bring my energy is it's kind of like a dad is. I'm not going to give you the answers. I'm going to help you find your answers. If you fall down and scrape your knee, I'm going to help you get up and go on your way, but I'm not going to do the work for you. I had to end up rebranding shortly after the pandemic because there were some people like, so you just coach dads? And I'm like, no, as a matter of fact, probably half, if not more, of my clients are women. So I realized that was confusing a lot of people. And so in January of 2021 is when I officially rebranded to my current brand that I'll stay with, which is Echelon Left. And that was also a nod to my time in the Marine Corps because an echelon is a military formation that allows for good field of view for all the elements of it, good communication, and good mobility for people to move and adjust. And to me, that represents what I help leaders get to do as well, is get a better field of view, but be able to make quick changes based on the situation, which comes back to the improvise and adapt that we talked about.
I love it. So you've been doing this now for like 4 years at this point.
Well, I've been doing the work for the last 12 years, really. And I've been doing leadership development for 25 plus. It's just that I've rebranded a couple times, but I've been doing the coaching professionally for 12 years now.
So are you a solo entrepreneur still, or do you have a team of people that help you do the work, bring it to customers?
It depends. So primarily it's me. Sometimes I'll have engagements with clients where they might have a larger number of people to be coached. And in that case, I have a cadre of coaches that I will call upon, and I might say to the client, okay, for that, I think we're going to need 3 additional coaches. And I'll give them maybe a list of 5 or 6 names to pick from. And then I will use those coaches to help deliver that coaching. So it just depends on what the client needs. And, I help create, like I said, what they need to support their efforts.
So when you think back to the start in 2020, you mentioned the pandemic. It was a way for you to connect with leaders and identify opportunities. As you were starting your business, what would you say was one of the bigger challenges you had to overcome? It
was building in time to build the business. And by that, what I mean is I was so focused on delivering the coaching, delivering the workshops, that I wasn't blocking time to consistently do business development, reaching out to potential clients, do the prospecting, things like that. So that was one of my biggest lessons early on is I had an influx of business, and for a while I could just coast with that. But then I got to a point where it was like, oh, wait a minute, some of these clients are dropping off because there's an arc to coaching. And I had to realize, oh, now I need to make sure that I'm putting in time to consistently do that. And so that was an early lesson for me that fortunately didn't bite me in the backside, but it could have.
Wow. So Christopher, I want to just take a moment, and as I think back of your career, people are in a very similar situation where they're in a job where they're not being fulfilled. So it's sort of like when you're in that construction position where it's feeding, maybe it's feeding your head, but it's not feeding your heart. And they recognize that there's a lack of fulfillment, and it's burnout may have led to disengagement, lack of job satisfaction, or maybe even career fatigue, where they're not just connected to the work. And it's hard to even consider making a change because you have this sort of buildup. I think about Annie Duke is someone who I've been fascinated with because she's not only a former poker player, but she's also a thought leader who wrote books around betting on yourself. And it's sort of like a play on words with betting. And she talked about the idea of quit. And when you are playing poker, when you're playing a hand, you have to fold probably 9 out of 10 hands before you stay in that one hand. And she sort of draws a parallel around this idea of quitting and why it's okay to quit.
Yes.
And she says people don't quit enough because we live in this culture where if you're in a career and you're not fulfilled, oftentimes it's just because you're not working hard enough, or you need to change it. You need to grit, you need to grind, you need to persevere, double down. Like there's all of these terms that connect with why people don't quit. And she talks about this tumbleweed, on how this tumbleweed over time accumulates stuff in your life and your career is almost like this collection of all of the experience and events and things. Sometimes it's professional, sometimes it's personal. And the reason people don't quit is because it's hard to unravel, and they just don't know how to unravel it.
Right.
And the question is where do you begin? Like what kind of advice do you offer someone on where to begin?
There's so much in that question, Raymond. I think the first thing is being honest with yourself. Right? That I love that analogy. You talk about, 9 out of 10 hands you should fold, but most of the time we don't. And so once I realized I know I'm not doing the work I'm supposed to be doing, that I'm not happy, and giving myself permission to be okay with that. Because as you said, a lot of our culture is you just have to work harder. And really the message is you're wrong for not being happy in your work. So I realize there's a lot of factors. Like you have to look at your economic situation and all those other things. But being honest with yourself and really admitting I'm not happy here, or this is not the work I'm supposed to be doing, like that's a big piece of it. Because when you come to terms with that, there's just I don't know if it's an ease I would say it would give you, but there's something about when you know a truth for yourself, some of the other things may seem less scary. Another thing I'll say too is sometimes we tell ourselves these stories of, if I leave, it will, like we create the horror stories. We create worst case scenarios and we don't know. So part of what I'd say is if you're not happy in the work you're doing, whatever it is, just start talking to other people. First of all, that's the thing, because we often do it alone and we isolate. Start talking with other people, family, friends, people you trust, just to confide them. It's not that you have to talk to them and they have to give you advice, because that's the other thing. People say, well, here's what you should do. I would tell people, I just want to share something and I don't need your input on what to do. That helps them understand, right? And for the people that are out there listening that love to give advice and tell people how to fix things, watch the TED Talk, How to Tame Your Advice Monster. Great talk. I love giving that to people. Anyhow, I digress. See, I do that again. But what I'd say is connect with other people. Talk to other people that if there's work you might be interested in, start having conversations with some of them and find out what is it that they do. What do they like? What do they not like about their role? Because sometimes it's the grass looks greener over there and you think, well, if I leave this job, that'll be great. But the other thing I say too is, it's a line I use often. We need to stop being so afraid of what could go wrong and start getting excited for what could go right. Because we often build up that if I leave, all these terrible things will happen. Or a possibility could be, if you leave, amazing things could happen. But if you stay where you are, you'll never know, right? A friend of mine, Ken Mossman, a great coach, he used to say, if you're trying to learn how to swim, you'll never do it if you keep holding on to the side of the pool. And so eventually you've got to let go and get out there in the water. So I went all over the place and I used a lot of metaphors. I don't know if I answered your question or not, Raymond.
You did. You answered it with being honest. And the first step is not making the choice, but being honest, which I go back to the three things that you said in the beginning, which is be real, be open, be curious. Being real is being honest with yourself first.
Yeah.
Then being open to the possibility, being open to doing something different, and then being curious around learning something new and stepping into that.
Yeah. Well, and being open to the people around you too, right? Because sometimes they can be great resources for you.
Right.
Yeah. And even sometimes just sharing a struggle we're going through with another person, they don't fix it for us, but even just the act of telling them that you're struggling with something, that feels like the burden's a little bit lighter. It doesn't solve the situation for you. But that's the thing I love about Brene Brown's work. She talks about sometimes just sharing that you're going through a struggle, it creates more connection. I've had friends say to me sometimes, hey, Christopher, I'm having a hard time with this. And I just simply listen. I'll sometimes say, what do you need from me? Do you need me just to listen to hear, or do you need me to listen to respond? But even them just telling me, they come out of it feeling like it doesn't feel as heavy for them. So that's why I keep coming back to this idea of connection. And instead of isolating and feeling like you've got to figure it all out yourself, reach out, lean into people around you. Not that they're going to fix it for you, but sometimes just connecting with another human makes this whole existence a little more bearable.
Yeah, well said. So, Christopher, tell me about the podcast that you're running today.
Yeah. And a podcast that you're going to be coming on at some point in the future.
Yes.
So the Vulnerable Man podcast, I started it back in July of 2020. And part of it was from when I did this leadership program that finished in 2016. And I came out of it with what we call the Leader Quest. And for me, I wanted to dive deeper into this connection between masculinity and vulnerability, mostly because I was trying to figure out what it meant for me. And in early 2016, I just started randomly interviewing men. I'd ask for 30 minutes of their time. I had 5 or 6 questions that I would ask that were around vulnerability, what it meant to them, what got in the way for them. And as I started having these conversations, one day it hit me. I think it was in April or May of 2020. And I had just finished an interview with a guy and I thought, wait a minute. Here I am talking to one guy at a time, which I loved, by the way. I interviewed hundreds of guys. But I thought, if I really want to make a difference around this, these one-on-one conversations aren't going to do it. More people need to hear about this. And so I thought, maybe I'll start a podcast. I knew nothing about podcasting, so I had to be very vulnerable. And I put it out to my community and I just said, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Anybody know anything about it? Because I'd love to pick your brain. And I was fortunate because there was a guy that reached out to me and said, I've been podcasting since it started. Happy to talk to you. And he took me under his wing and kind of like said, gave me a lot of the do's and don'ts, tips and tricks. And so in July of that year, I launched it. And in a moment of vulnerability, when I started it, I thought, okay, it'll be me talking a lot and occasionally I'll have guests, because my inner critic was telling me, Christopher, guys aren't going to want to talk to you about vulnerability. So I thought, I'll say that sometimes I'll have guests because I know I was going to have trouble finding it. Well, we know now that's not the case, more than 100, almost 120 episodes later. And what I found is, as I was leaning into it more, I was talking with more and more men that were open to the conversation. And what I've discovered is men are hungry for more vulnerability, but because of our man box culture that a lot of us fall prey to, we don't feel safe saying that or sharing it. And so I created the podcast because what I want to do was share other people's stories as well, the successes, the failures, their journeys, and things like that. Because what I know is not everybody's going to relate to Christopher's story, but they might hear Raymond's story or Bill's story and go, I can kind of relate to that person. And that might invite them to be a little more vulnerable. And here's the kicker. I specifically started talking to men because I knew I wanted to get men's perspectives. But then I started adding women as well, because some of the guys I talked to would say, my partner, she tells me she wants me to be more vulnerable, but then when I do, she doesn't know what to do with it. And so now I love talking to people about vulnerability and how we can expand it so that we can all feel more connected together. And again, it all comes back to connection, ironically, which is what my talk was about, which is part of what the work that I do in the world.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's so inspiring. I love how you navigated your journey where you sort of this evolution of your vulnerability as a man. It didn't happen overnight, and now you're creating space for men, in some cases, maybe for the first time. It's a muscle. It really is a muscle that when you have a guest on, they're probably super nervous and they're sharing things maybe for the first time. And that feels good. And it really is a muscle that your podcast is a place for them to sort of practice. They expose to the level of their comfort. And they realize, wow, I could be my most authentic self everywhere I go, whether I'm at work, I'm at home. And it's so important for people. Right. And so kudos to you. I think it's fantastic. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned on this journey with the podcast and other elements is one of my guests, and that's it. I get to talk to some amazing people, but they introduced me to this concept of the gift of going second. And I wish I could remember who told me I need to give credit where credit is due. But what that is, and I think I'd been doing it ever since I was on this journey, but I didn't have a label for it. People hear former Marine, combat veteran, 6 years in construction. They automatically and unconsciously create an idea of how I'm going to show up, right? And then when I show up and I'm willing to be vulnerable, often they kind of go, whoa, wait a minute. Wait, this guy can do that? And it has them go, well, if he can, why can't I? And so it's a way of me, it's almost like to use a term we were talking before, like it's a little bit of an ambush on them, but it's also an invitation. And what I found is when I'm willing to be a little bit vulnerable and go first, it takes the pressure off them. I don't expect them to. And what I often find is when I'm willing to be vulnerable first, people open up to me a little bit more. And that creates more connection and more trust. And now maybe when they go back to their partner or their friends, they're open to being a little more vulnerable too. So that's the gift of going second.
I love it. I appreciate you sharing. I hadn't heard that before, so I appreciate that. Christopher, this has been such a delight.
The time has flown. This is amazing.
Yeah, it really is. I'm just so grateful that you and I connected and we share so much in common, and just really appreciate our connection here today, and really appreciate your being vulnerable with our listeners and sharing your story. I'm going to share all your information in our show notes so people can find you. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, well, I just want to say, Raymond, thank you for having me on. One of the things that I've loved about this journey is I get to meet some amazing people. And even when you and I were talking before we jumped on to record this, I've appreciated the way you've just shown up as yourself and been real. And even as we started this conversation and you shared that connection we had, it instantly, as I said, had me feel more connected. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in this conversation. And I hope that your folks that are listening, they got something out of it. And I guess my challenge for them is to look for someone in their life that they can be a little bit more vulnerable with for the sake of creating a better relationship and deeper connection. So Thank you for this opportunity.
Wow, that's great. I appreciate that. And there's so many nuggets and takeaways that I feel like I learn things every episode that I'm on. I feel like it's like
right?
It's so therapeutic, and there's so many takeaways. So I know that people who are listening are going to feel the same. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciated being here.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, everyone. It's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment to say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of career transition and career development solutions. And if you'd like to hear more on Clocking Out, we'd love for you to take a second and click follow of your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. You can also watch the full episode on YouTube. Just search Clocking Out with Raymond Lee and hit subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to check out our episode polls or just drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you or someone you know has a story to share about navigating change, taking a risk, or rethinking your career, we want to hear from you. Head to the link in our show notes and fill out the form to be considered for a future episode. Until next time, remember, if you're just sitting there thinking that you're stuck or you're unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage yourself to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that genuinely matter to me most? Am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.